If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Let's continue. The fine June rain beat softly against the windows of the apartment in the Lincoln Park neighborhood of Chicago, while Edward finished packing his suitcase for the third time that month. The trips had become more frequent since he took the position of regional manager, and each departure carried a weight he tried to ignore, but which grew silently with every goodbye. At 38, Edward had built a solid career as an engineer, earning respect and a comfortable position that allowed him to offer his children the very best. Everything, except the one thing Amelia and Leo truly needed: his presence. Amelia watched her father from the hallway, leaning against the doorframe with that observant manner she had developed from a very young age. At 10, she already carried a responsibility on her delicate shoulders that shouldn't have been hers, but which she had naturally embraced when her mother left 3 years earlier, leaving a void no one knew how to fill. There were no goodbyes, just a brief letter explaining that she needed to find herself, that the marriage was suffocating her, that the children would be better off with their father. Amelia held those words in her memory like one holds shards of glass, knowing they would hurt if touched, but unable to discard them completely. Leo, for his part, barely remembered his mother's face. At only 7, his memories were blurred fragments of a woman who smelled of lavender and sang softly before bed. For him, the family had always been just 3, Dad, Amelia, and him. And that was enough until everything began to change so subtly that he couldn't pinpoint exactly when the house stopped feeling like a home. The change began 6 months ago, when Edward met Veronica at a business conference in New York City. She was everything he thought he needed: independent, successful, with an elegant posture and a smile that seemed promised only to him in their first few meetings. Veronica worked as a human resources consultant, traveled constantly, spoke 3 languages, and wore high heels even on Sundays. Edward saw in her the possibility of rebuilding something he thought he had lost forever, the idea of a complete family. The courtship was fast, almost urgent. Edward felt that time was running against him, that he needed to give his children what their mother had taken away. He didn't notice, in his haste to fill the void, that Amelia watched him with a silent suspicion every time Veronica visited the apartment. He didn't notice that Leo hid behind his sister whenever the woman tried to talk to him, his large, frightened eyes seeking protection. Veronica moved into the apartment in March, bringing with her elegant leather suitcases, modern paintings that replaced the children's drawings on the wall, and a series of unspoken rules that began to transform the dynamic of that home. At first, they were small changes. The toys that once spread across the living room had to be put away, the television volume had to be lower because she worked from home, mealtimes became rigid and inflexible. Edward, immersed in his work, and relieved to have someone looking after the house during his absences, interpreted Veronica's rigidity as organization, her distance as respect for the children's space, her impatience as justifiable fatigue. After all, taking on 2 of someone else's children was no easy task, he thought, trying to be understanding. She just needed time to adapt, to create bonds, to learn to love them. He believed this with an almost desperate faith, but time, contrary to what Edward had hoped, did not bring them closer. Each week, the distance between Veronica and the children seemed to grow, transforming into a silent abyss that no one dared to name. Amelia noticed everything, with that keen sensitivity that children have for detecting when they are not wanted. She noticed how Veronica would avert her gaze when Leo tried to show her a drawing, how she would sigh impatiently when Amelia asked something about school, how the smile she offered Edward would vanish the moment he walked out the door. That June morning, Edward double-checked his documents, his laptop, the contracts he needed to review during the flight to Minneapolis. Another week away, more endless meetings, more nights in impersonal hotels. He went into the children's room where Amelia was pretending to read a book and Leo was assembling a puzzle on the floor. The boy looked up, and Edward saw something there that disturbed him for a moment, a sadness that seemed too big to fit on such a small face. He knelt beside his son and affectionately ruffled his brown hair. "Amelia said you have a bit of a cough, Leo. Did you take the syrup I left out for you?" The boy nodded, but he didn't smile. Edward felt a tightness in his chest, an uncomfortable feeling that he was forgetting something important, but he couldn't identify what. "Veronica will take care of you, okay? If you need anything, you can call me. Any time, it doesn't matter." Amelia slowly closed her book, carefully marking the page before looking at her father. Her dark brown eyes, so much like his, held a question she didn't know how to ask. "How long this time, Dad?" The voice came out low, almost a whisper. "A week, Amy. 10 days at most if something unexpected comes up." Edward noticed the tension in his daughter's shoulders, the way she hugged the book to her chest like a shield. "Are you okay? Do you need anything?" "I'm fine, Dad. You can go without worrying." The words were right, but the tone was not. Edward knew his daughter well enough to know something was bothering her, but not well enough to be able to extract the truth from her. Amelia had learned in recent months to keep secrets, to protect her brother, to smile when necessary and hide the rest. She was afraid of worrying her father, of creating problems, of seeming like a difficult child who didn't accept his new partner. So, she stayed silent. Edward kissed both their foreheads, promised to bring presents, repeated the cell phone number that was already taped to the refrigerator, and finally left, carrying his suitcase and a discomfort he tried to smother with professional justifications. At the door, he crossed paths with Veronica, who was returning from a morning run in the park. She wore an impeccable workout outfit, her blonde hair tied in a high ponytail, earbuds still in her ears. She looked at him with an automatic smile, kissed him quickly, and went inside without asking about the children. In the apartment, the silence that fell after Edward's departure was different from the silences before. It was a heavy silence, laden with expectation and apprehension. Amelia got up from the bed and went to the window, watching her father's car disappear around the corner. Beside her, Leo held her hand tightly, a small gesture that said a lot about the fear that was beginning to settle in that home. Veronica walked straight past their room without a glance, her heels clicking loudly on the wooden floor even though it was so early. She went into the bathroom, turned on the shower, and for 40 minutes the apartment was filled only with the sound of running water and the held breath of 2 children who were learning day by day to take up less and less space. When Veronica finally came out of her room, already dressed in slacks and a silk blouse, she found Amelia in the kitchen trying to make breakfast for herself and her brother. The girl had reached the bread on the high shelf with difficulty, balancing on a stool that creaked under her weight. Leo was sitting at the table, swinging his short legs that didn't reach the floor, waiting patiently. Veronica entered the kitchen, her blue eyes scanning the scene with something Amelia couldn't name, but that made her feel small, inadequate, unwanted. The woman didn't say good morning. She didn't ask if they had slept well, if Leo was still coughing during the night, if Amelia needed help reaching things. She simply walked past, took a coffee, pod from the shelf, prepared her cup in the modern machine Edward had bought and left the kitchen, taking with her the only good smell of that morning. Amelia felt her eyes sting, but she blinked quickly to ward off the tears. She couldn't cry. Leo was watching her with that blind trust that younger siblings have, expecting her to fix everything, to make the world safe again. So she swallowed the lump in her throat, spread jam on the toast, served warm milk for them both, and sat down beside her brother, pretending that everything was fine. The days that followed established a routine that was cruel in its predictability. Veronica would wake up late, work on her laptop in the living room with headphones on, take long calls in a professional and charming tone she never used inside the house, and disappear for hours on errands she didn't explain. The children learned to be invisible, to not make noise, to handle their own needs by themselves. Amelia would wake Leo every morning, help him get dressed, prepare a simple breakfast, check his school backpack, and they would walk the 3 blocks to the local public school together, in Dai. The afternoon, she would pick him up, help him with his homework, invent quiet games in their room and prepare sandwiches that they ate in secret while Veronica talked on the phone in the living room, complaining to someone about how tired she was, how complicated life had become, how this wasn't what she had imagined when she moved to Chicago. Amelia heard fragments of these conversations through the ajar door, and each word was like a confirmation of what she already suspected. They were not wanted. They were just obstacles, complications, responsibilities that Veronica had accepted for the love of Edward, but which she endured with growing impatience. At school, Amelia kept up appearances. She was a good student, polite, always with organized notebooks and completed assignments. The teachers praised her, her classmates admired her, but no one noticed the weight she carried on her increasingly stooped shoulders. Only her English teacher, Mrs. Eleanor, a woman with greying hair and kind eyes, began to notice small changes. Amelia, who used to participate actively in class, was now quiet, staring out the window. The sparkle in her eyes was beginning to fade, replaced by a worry that shouldn't inhabit the face of a 10-year-old child. Leo, in first grade, began to show other signs. He cried easily, no longer wanted to play at recess, and came home clutching his backpack as if it were the only solid thing in a crumbling world. His teacher called for a meeting, but Veronica told Edward over the phone that it was just a phase, that the boy was too sensitive, that he needed to toughen up a bit. Edward, exhausted and confused, believed her because it was easier than facing the truth. One afternoon, Amelia came home from school to find Leo sitting in the building's hallway outside the apartment, his backpack in his lap and his eyes red from crying. "What happened? Why are you out here?" Amelia knelt beside him, her heart racing. "I rang the doorbell, but she didn't open it. I rang again and she yelled at me to stop bothering her, that she was in an important meeting." The boy's voice came out shaky, choked. "I got scared, Amy." Amelia felt an anger she had never experienced before burn in her chest. She took the key she hid in the inner pocket of her backpack, the key her father had left her for emergencies, and opened the door with trembling hands. The apartment was silent. Veronica was not in the living room. Amelia guided her brother to their room, closed the door slowly, and hugged him as he finally broke down, crying into her shoulder all the fear and confusion he had accumulated. That night, Amelia did something she had been putting off for weeks. She waited until Leo fell asleep, took the old cell phone her father had left her for emergencies and typed a message. "Dad, I need to talk to you, it's important." But before she could send it, the bedroom door opened abruptly and Veronica entered, her cold eyes fixed on her. "What are you doing? You should be asleep." "I was just going to send a message to my dad." Amelia's voice came out firm, firmer than she felt. Veronica held out her hand. "Give me that phone. This is no time to be bothering your father with nonsense. He's working." Amelia clutched the phone to her chest. "But I need to talk to him. He said I could call whenever I needed to." "I said, give me the phone, Amelia. Don't Let me repeat myself." The tone was low, controlled, but laden with a veiled threat that made Amelia's heart pound. The girl looked at Veronica, then at Leo sleeping, and slowly handed over the device. Veronica took it, turned it off, and left the room without another word, taking with her the last line of communication Amelia had with her father. That night, Amelia couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, feeling the world shrink around her, feeling trapped in a situation she didn't know how to solve. Leo stirred in his sleep, reaching for her hand, and Amelia intertwined her small fingers with his, making a silent promise that no matter what happened, she would protect her brother. Somehow she would find a way to make someone see them again. On the other side of the wall, in the neighboring apartment, Martin turned off the television and walked to the kitchen for a glass of water. At 52, an early retiree due to health problems, he spent most of his days alone since his wife had passed away 2 years prior. The apartment next door had always been noisy in a good way, with children's laughter, music, life. But lately, the silence coming from there bothered him more than the noise ever had. Martin knew Edward from the hallways, quick conversations in the elevator, the kind of cordial but distant neighborliness typical of modern buildings. He knew the children too, always polite, always smiling when they passed him. But something had changed. In recent months, when he crossed paths with them, the smiles were forced, their eyes downcast, their rush to get into the apartment almost desperate. And there was the new woman, Veronica. Martin had seen her a few times, always elegant, always in a hurry, always with that expression of someone who is in a place they don't want to be. He tried not to judge, not to interfere. After all, every family had its own dynamics. But there was something wrong there, something his gut picked up on even without concrete proof. That night, as he washed the glass in the sink, Martin heard something that made him stop. A muffled cry coming from the other side of the wall, a child's cry trying not to be heard, a cry that broke the heart of anyone with ears to listen. He stood there, in the dark of his kitchen, torn between the desire to do something and the fear of meddling where he wasn't wanted. Finally, he decided that the next day he would try to talk to Edward. He needed to know if those children were okay, if they needed help. Martin had his own scars from the past, painful memories of a younger sister he couldn't protect when they were children, a sister who had suffered at the home of an aunt who had promised to care for her and who, in the end, had neglected her until it was too late. He wouldn't let history repeat itself if he could help it. Not this time. Back in her room, Amelia finally began to feel sleep come, but it was a restless sleep, filled with nightmares, where she ran through dark corridors looking for an exit she never found. She woke before dawn with her heart racing and the increasingly strong certainty that she needed to find a way to ask for help before it was too late. But how could she do that without the phone? How could she reach her father when he was so far away? How could she make someone understand? What was happening when she couldn't even put it into words herself? The morning arrived grey and cold, typical of a Chicago winter. Amelia woke Leo gently, helped him dress in his warmest sweater, prepared a quick breakfast, and they left for school before Veronica woke up. On the way, Leo held her hand tightly and asked softly, "When is Dad coming back, Amy?" "Soon," she replied, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "He'll be back soon, and everything will be okay." But Amelia wasn't sure of anything. She didn't know if everything would be okay. She didn't know if her father would believe her. She didn't know if she had enough courage to tell the truth. What she did know, with a frightening clarity for her age, was that the life they knew was crumbling around them, and if they didn't do something soon, it would collapse completely. At school during English class, Mrs. Eleanor asked them to write an essay on what it meant to have a home. Amelia picked up her pencil with trembling hands and began to write, letting the words flow without a filter. A home isn't just a place with walls and a roof. It's where you feel safe, where you can be who you are without fear, where people truly see you and love you even when you make mistakes. A home is where you belong, and sometimes you can be living in a house and still feel like you don't have a home. Mrs. Eleanor read that essay after class, and every word deeply disturbed her. She had known Amelia for 3 years, saw in her a bright, sensitive girl, mature beyond her years. But those were not the words of a happy child. They were from someone who was asking for help in the only way she knew how. The teacher carefully saved the essay and decided she needed to act. The next day, she would schedule a meeting with the guardians. She needed to understand what was happening in that family before that light in Amelia's eyes went out completely. Meanwhile, in Minneapolis, Edward finished another exhausting meeting and checked his cell phone for the 10th time that day. No messages from home, no calls. He should have felt relieved, a sign that everything was fine. But instead, a restlessness grew in his chest. He called the apartment, and Veronica answered with that professional voice she used in meetings. "Is everything okay there? Are the kids okay?" "Everything's great, Edward. You can relax. They're at school now. We'll talk later. I'm on an important call." Edward hung up, but the restlessness didn't go away. There was something in her voice, a poorly disguised impatience, that bothered him. He thought about calling Amelia, but remembered she didn't have her phone during class. He would send a message later when she got home from school, but that message would never be sent because at that very moment, Veronica was tossing Amelia's cell phone into the back of a drawer, locking it, and keeping the key for herself. The afternoon fell over Chicago with that damp cold that seeps into your bones. Amelia and Leo walked home from school slowly, delaying the moment they had to enter the apartment. When they finally went up, they found a note on the kitchen table. "Went out. Back late. Food in the fridge." The words were dry, without affection, but for the children, they meant a few hours of peace, A few hours where they could breathe without fear. Amelia heated up the food for them both, and as they ate in silence, Leo looked at her with those big eyes and asked, "Did we do something wrong, Amy? Why doesn't she like us?" Amelia's heart ached. "No, Leo. We didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes people just don't know how to love right. But Dad loves us, and that's what matters." Leo seemed to accept the explanation, but Amelia knew the words were empty. Their father's love, as real as it was too far away to warm them, and Veronica, who was there every day, treated them as if they were invisible, as if they were a burden too heavy to carry. That night, after Leo fell asleep, Amelia sat on the floor of their room with a notebook and a pen. She began to write a letter to her father, putting on paper everything she couldn't say out loud. She wrote about the fear, the loneliness, about how she sometimes felt like she was sinking, and there was no one to hold her hand. She wrote about Leo crying in secret, about the days when they had no one to talk to, about the feeling of being invisible in their own home. When she finished, she carefully folded the letter and hid it inside her favorite book. She didn't know when she would be able to give it to her father, but writing had helped to lift some of the weight she carried. She lay down next to her brother, pulled the blanket up to her chin and closed her eyes, silently praying that someone somewhere would notice that they needed help. The alarm clock went off at 6 in the morning, but Amelia had been awake for hours. The night had been long, filled with thoughts that spun in circles, without finding a way out. Beside her, Leo slept restlessly, murmuring incomprehensible words, his eyebrows furrowed even in sleep. The girl reached out and lightly touched her brother's forehead, feeling a warmth that worried her. He was feverish again, the third time that month. Amelia got up carefully so as not to wake him and walked to the bathroom. The mirror reflected an image that startled her for a moment. Dark circles under her brown eyes, pale skin, chapped lips. She looked older, tired, as if she were carrying the weight of years she hadn't yet lived. She splashed her face with cold water, trying to wake up a body that insisted on dragging itself, and returned to the room to wake Leo. The boy slowly opened his eyes, confused about where he was, and upon recognizing his sister, he managed a weak smile that broke Amelia's heart. "How are you feeling?" Her voice came out soft, motherly. "I'm cold, Amy, and my throat hurts." Leo tried to sit up, but the effort seemed too great. Amelia touched his forehead again and felt the confirmation of what she already suspected. The fever was high. The clock read 6:20. Veronica was still asleep. The door to the master bedroom closed as always, a physical barrier that symbolized the emotional barrier between her and the children. Amelia knew she should wake her, tell her about Leo's fever, ask for help. But the memory of the last times she had tried to bother Veronica in the morning paralyzed her. The cold eyes, the sharp voice, the feeling of being an unwanted nuisance. She decided to try to handle it herself. She went to the medicine cabinet in the bathroom, looking for the fever reducer. Her father always kept on hand. The box was there, but when Amelia opened it, she found only the instruction leaflet. The bottle was empty. She searched the shelves, behind the other medicines, but there wasn't another one. Her heart began to race. Leo needed the medicine, his fever was rising, and she didn't know what to do. She took a deep breath, gathered her courage, and walked to Veronica's bedroom door. She knocked lightly, waited. Nothing. She knocked again, a little harder. "Veronica, Leo has a high fever and the medicine is gone." Silence. Amelia was about to knock a third time when the door swung open abruptly, revealing Veronica in a silk robe, her face marked by interrupted sleep and an expression of barely contained irritation. "What time is it, Amelia?" The voice was low, controlled but charged with something that made the girl take a step back. "It's 6:30. I'm sorry to wake you, but Leo has a really high fever and there's no more fever reducer." Veronica closed her eyes for a long moment, as if gathering patience to deal with an absurdly inconvenient situation. "Then give him a cold bath. I need more sleep. I have an important presentation this afternoon." "But what about the medicine?" Amelia's voice came out higher than she intended, filled with desperation. Veronica sighed deeply. "Amelia, I'm not a doctor, and I'm not a pharmacy. You'll have to wait for the drugstore to open at 8. Now let me sleep." And before the girl could say anything else, the door closed with a final click. Amelia stood in the hallway, feeling tears burn behind her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She couldn't afford to break down. Leo needed her. She went back to their room, helped her brother get up, and guided him to the bathroom. Shower water came out cold, making Leo shiver and cry softly, but Amelia held him tightly, whispering words of comfort as she tried to bring the fever down as best she could. When she finally managed to get him dressed and back in bed, it was past 7. School started at 7:30, but Amelia knew she couldn't leave her brother alone in that condition. She took the phone book her father kept in a living room drawer, looked up the school's number, and using the landline phone quietly so as not to wake Veronica again, she reported that Leo would be absent due to illness. The hours that followed were an eternity. Amelia stayed by her brother's bedside, changing improvised compresses with wet cloths, offering small sips of water, softly humming the songs their mother used to sing, songs she barely remembered but that emerged from her memory when she needed them most. Leo dozed, woke up startled, reached for his sister's hand, and fell back asleep, in a cycle that repeated itself endlessly. At 8 o'clock sharp, Amelia took the money she kept in a piggy bank, savings from birthdays and small gifts, and ran down to the pharmacy on the corner. Her hands trembled as she gave the money to the pharmacist, and the white-haired man looked at her with a concerned expression. "Are you okay, little girl? Does your mother know you're here?" Amelia lied, said yes, that her mother was at home with her sick brother, took the medicine and ran back to the apartment. When she entered, she found Veronica in the living room, already dressed for work, typing furiously on her laptop. She looked up as Amelia passed but said nothing, just returned to the screen with a look of concentration that made it clear any interruption would be unwelcome. Amelia went straight to the room, gave the medicine to her brother with the correct dosage she had memorized from the other times, and sat beside him, waiting for it to take effect. Around 10 in the morning, the fever finally began to break. Leo opened his eyes, more lucid, and asked for water and a piece of bread. Amelia prepared everything carefully, and as she watched him eat slowly, she felt a relief so immense she had to hold back tears again. Veronica had left without saying goodbye, without checking on Leo, without even asking if Amelia needed anything. The apartment was plunged into a silence that was both a relief and a profound loneliness. Amelia turned on the television at a low volume, put on a cartoon that Leo liked, and finally allowed herself to sit down, feeling exhaustion take over every muscle in her body. It was then that the landline phone rang, startling her. "Hello?" Her voice was hesitant. "Amelia, is that you?" The voice on the other end was familiar, gentle. "Mrs. Eleanor, your English teacher." "Yes, Mrs. Eleanor, it's me." "Dear, you were absent today and I was worried. Is everything all right?" Amelia hesitated. Could she tell the truth? Could she say she was home taking care of her sick brother because Veronica didn't care? Could she ask for help? "I'm fine, Mrs. Eleanor. It's just that my brother got sick and I had to stay with him." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "And your mother, is she there with you?" Amelia swallowed hard. "My stepmother is... she's at work, but it's okay. I know how to take care of Leo." Another pause, longer this time. "Amelia, dear, you are a very responsible girl, but taking care of a sick sibling is an adult's responsibility. Are you sure everything is all right there?" Mrs. Eleanor's voice was filled with a concern that Amelia rarely heard, and it almost made her break down. "Yes, Mrs. Eleanor, it is. Leo is already better. I'll be back at school tomorrow." She didn't want to end the call, didn't want to lose that connection with someone who seemed to genuinely care, but she didn't know what else to say. Mrs. Eleanor seemed to sense her hesitation. "All right, Amelia, but if you need anything, you can call me." "Okay. Anything at all. The school has my number." Amelia thanked her and hung up, feeling like she had missed an important opportunity, but lacking the courage to seize it. The day dragged on slowly. Amelia prepared a simple lunch with what she found in the fridge, gave her brother his medicine at the right times, and change the compresses when the fever threatened to return. Leo was improving gradually, but he was still weak, pale, smaller than he really was. In the afternoon, he asked Amelia to read to him, and she picked up a book of children's stories she had gotten for Christmas, sat on the bed beside him, and read in a voice that tried to convey cheerfulness, but came out tired and sad. Veronica returned to the apartment at 6 in the evening, carrying shopping bags that clearly did not include food for the children. She walked straight past their room without asking how Leo was, locked herself in the master bedroom, and only came out an hour later to eat dinner alone in the living room, watching a TV show while eating a pre-made salad she had brought. Amelia waited for her to finish, waited for the right moment, and finally gathered the courage to leave the room. "Veronica, can I talk to you?" The woman looked up from her plate with an annoyed expression. "What is it now, Amelia?" The voice was tired, impatient. "Leo was sick today, with a very high fever. I gave him the medicine and he got better, but I think it would be good for Dad to know. Can you call him?" Veronica put her fork back on the plate with a sharp movement. "Amelia, your father is in important meetings. I'm not going to bother him because your brother had a fever. Children get fevers, it's part of life. It's over now, isn't it? So there's no reason for alarm." "But," Amelia tried to insist, but Veronica cut her off. "But nothing, Amelia. You need to stop with all this drama. Your brother is fine. You're fine. There's nothing to tell your father. Now let me finish my dinner in peace." Amelia felt her face burn, a mixture of shame, anger, and helplessness. She returned to the room with slow steps, closed the door, and lay down beside Leo, who was already asleep again. She hugged her brother, carefully so as not to wake him, and finally allowed the tears to fall, silent, wetting the pillow as the apartment plunged into the darkness of night. On the other side of the wall, Martin was finishing washing his dinner dishes when he heard that muffled cry again. This time he didn't hesitate. He left his apartment, went to the door next to his, and rang the bell. He waited, then rang again. Veronica answered with a look of surprise and irritation. "Yes?" "Good evening. I'm Martin from the apartment next door. Sorry to bother you, but I was hoping to speak with Edward. Is he in?" "Edward is traveling for work. Why?" Martin noticed her defensive tone, her closed-off posture, her crossed arms. "It's just that I've been hearing some strange noises from here, crying, and I got worried." "Are the children okay?" Veronica forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "The children are great. Thank you for your concern. It's just Leo who had a bit of a cold today. You know how it is. But everything's under control." Martin felt there was more to it than she was letting on, but he couldn't push without seeming invasive. "If you need anything at all, you can call on me. I live alone and have plenty of time." Veronica thanked him quickly and closed the door, ending the conversation. Martin returned to his apartment with a growing unease in his chest. Something was wrong. His instinct screamed it, but he had no proof, no certainty, just a bad feeling that wouldn't leave him in peace. That night, he made a decision. The next day, he would find a way to speak with Edward directly. To alert him to his concerns, he couldn't stand by and watch those children suffer. Not again. Not after what had happened to his sister so many years ago. Meanwhile, in Minneapolis, Edward finished another business dinner and returned to his hotel, exhausted. He sat on the bed, picked up his cell phone, and finally called home. The phone rang several times before Veronica answered. "Hi, honey, how was your day?" Her voice was smooth, controlled. "It was good. And there? How are things? The kids?" "Everything's calm here. The kids are already asleep. Leo had a bit of a cold today, but it was nothing serious. Amelia took good care of him." Edward felt a pang of something he couldn't identify. "Amelia took care of him. Weren't you home?" Veronica sighed. "Edward, I was home, but I was in meetings all day. Amelia is very responsible. She even bought the medicine at the pharmacy herself and took care of her brother. Everything's fine, you don't need to worry." Edward wanted to believe her, but something about the story bothered him. Amelia was only 10. She shouldn't be buying medicine alone. She shouldn't be caring for a sick brother without supervision. "Veronica, I left emergency money and I asked you to take care. of them while I'm away. Amelia is still a child. She can't have all that responsibility." His voice came out harsher than he intended. Veronica responded in a chilly tone. "I know she's a child, Edward, but you're not here to see how things are. I have my work, my obligations. I can't drop everything every time a child gets a low-grade fever. Amelia is capable. She wanted to help." Edward ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. This wasn't what they had agreed on. This wasn't what he had imagined when Veronica moved into the apartment. He wanted to say more, to question, to demand explanations, but he was tired, confused, and the distance made everything harder. "I'll call again tomorrow, and I want to talk to the kids. I want to hear from Amelia how her day was." Veronica agreed quickly, ended the call with an excuse that she was tired, and Edward was left alone in the hotel room with a growing sense that he was failing his children in a way he couldn't fully comprehend. The next morning, Amelia woke Leo and was relieved to see the fever hadn't returned. The boy was still pale and weak, but he asked for breakfast and showed a desire to go to school, which Amelia took as a good sign. She prepared him carefully, dressing him in warm clothes, and they left together while Veronica was still asleep. At school, Mrs. Eleanor was waiting for Amelia at the classroom door. "Can I speak with you for a minute?" The teacher guided the girl to a more private corner of the hallway. "How is your brother today?" Amelia forced a smile. "He's better, Mrs. Eleanor. The fever is gone." Mrs. Eleanor studied the girl's face, noticing the even deeper, dark circles, the paleness, the way her shoulders seemed to carry an invisible weight. "Amelia, I read your essay about what a home is. It was very beautiful, very mature, but it also left me worried. Is there anything you want to tell me? Something that's bothering you at home?" Amelia felt her heart pound. Could she trust Mrs. Eleanor? Could she tell her everything? But what if the teacher didn't believe her? What if she thought she was exaggerating? What if she told Veronica and made everything worse? "No, Mrs. Eleanor, everything's fine. It's just that sometimes it's hard. You know, my dad travels a lot and I miss him, but everything's fine." Mrs. Eleanor didn't seem convinced, but she respected the girl's boundary. "All right, dear, but I want you to know that my door is always open. If you need to talk about anything, you can come find me." "Promise?" Amelia promised, but they both knew it was a fragile promise, made more out of politeness than conviction. The school day passed in slow motion. Amelia tried to concentrate on her lessons, but her mind was divided between worrying about Leo, who had been quieter than usual at recess, and the fear of what they would find when they returned home. In the afternoon, when they finally left, they walked slowly through the streets of Chicago, delaying the moment they had to return to the apartment. It was then that they saw Martin at the corner bakery. The man waved to them with a gentle smile. "Hi, Amelia. Hi, Leo. How are you two?" Amelia replied with automatic politeness. "We're fine, thank you. And you?" Martin bought some bread, and while waiting for his change, chatted with them about simple things, the cold school, the soccer team Leo liked. There was something about his manner, a genuine kindness that made Amelia lower her guard a little. "You know, if you ever need anything, you can knock on my door. I live alone, and I always have fresh coffee and cookies. Sometimes it's good to have a neighbor nearby." Amelia thanked him but made no promises. Still, the offer echoed in her mind as they went up to the apartment. Maybe there were people who cared. Maybe there was help available if she had the courage to ask. When they entered, they found Veronica getting ready to go out again. She glanced at Leo with a quick expression that could have been mistaken for concern if one didn't know better. "Are you feeling better today?" The boy nodded, looking down. "Good. I'm going out to dinner with clients. There's food in the fridge. Don't make a mess." And before they could answer, she was already leaving behind a trail of expensive perfume and indifference. Amelia prepared dinner for them both, helped Leo with his homework, gave him a bath, and put him to bed early. When she was finally alone in the room, she took out the letter. She had written to her father and reread every word. She needed to find a way to deliver it, to make her father understand what was happening. But how could she do that with Veronica controlling everything, with the phone hidden, with the constant feeling that any wrong move would make the situation even worse. She fell asleep without finding any answers, but with a growing determination that she needed to act soon. She couldn't go on like this indefinitely. She couldn't let the situation get any worse. Somehow she had to find the courage to ask for the help they so desperately needed before it was too late. The days that followed seemed to both drag on and speed up at the same time, an agonizing contradiction that Amelia felt in her chest every morning she woke up. Leo recovered from the fever, but something in him had changed. The boy who was once chatty and curious had become too quiet, withdrawn, as if he had learned that taking up space was dangerous. He stopped asking questions, stopped talking about school, and would spend hours sitting in his room just looking out the window with a distant expression that broke Amelia's heart. At school, Mrs. Eleanor never took her eyes off Amelia. The teacher had seen many children over her 30 years in the profession. She had learned to read the silent signs of those who were suffering at home but had no voice to scream. And Amelia showed all those signs, her performance gradually declining, her participation in class diminishing, her isolation from classmates, the dark circles that seemed to dig deeper each day. Even more alarming was the way the girl would jump, startled, whenever someone spoke too loudly, or how her eyes constantly darted to the classroom door, as if expecting something bad was about to happen. During a break on a rainy Thursday, Mrs. Eleanor called Amelia to her desk as the other students left for recess. "Sit here with me for a little bit." Amelia obeyed, her hands clasped in her lap, her eyes fixed on the desk. The teacher took a box of cookies she kept in her drawer and offered one to the girl, who took one only out of politeness, but didn't eat it. "Amelia, I need you to be honest with me. Is something happening at home that I should know about?" Amelia felt her throat tighten. Could she trust her? Should she trust her? The consequences of telling the truth seemed terrifying, but the consequences of staying silent were perhaps worse. "My dad travels a lot," she began, her voice low. "And Veronica, she doesn't really like us. She doesn't do anything bad, it's not that. She just doesn't care about us. It's like we don't exist." Mrs. Eleanor's heart ached. "She doesn't take care of you when your father is away." Amelia hesitated. "She's always busy, working or going out. I'm the one who takes care of Leo. I make the food, help with homework, things like that." The teacher leaned forward, her voice soft but firm. "Amelia, you are 10 years old. You shouldn't have to do all of that alone. That is an adult's responsibility. Have you talked to your father about this?" "I tried, but she won't let me. She hid my cell phone and won't let me call him. She says he's too busy, that I shouldn't bother him with silly things." The revelation came out in a single breath, and Amelia immediately regretted it, her eyes wide with fear. "Please don't tell her I said anything. Please. She'll get angry and it will make everything worse." Mrs. Eleanor took the girl's trembling hands. "I promise I will be careful, but I need to help you. Do you trust me?" Amelia looked at the teacher's kind face, at the eyes that shone with genuine concern, and slowly nodded. Mrs. Eleanor took a piece of paper and a pen. "I'm going to write my personal phone number here. If anything happens, anything at all, you call me, okay? It doesn't matter what time it is." Amelia took the paper with trembling hands and tucked it into the deepest pocket of her backpack, where Veronica wouldn't find it if she decided to go through her things. That same afternoon, Mrs. Eleanor made 2 important calls. The first was to the number listed on Amelia's school file, Edward's cell phone. The call went to voicemail and she left a message asking him to call back urgently about a matter concerning his children. The second call was to the city's social services, reporting her concerns about possible neglect, but without yet filing a formal complaint. She wanted to give Edward a chance to resolve the situation before involving the authorities. Meanwhile, Martin couldn't get the children out of his head. In the last few days, he had intensified his discreet observation. He noticed that Amelia and Leo left for school very early, always alone, always with that hurried manner of someone fleeing from something. He noticed that Veronica left and returned at irregular hours, often leaving the apartment empty all day. He noticed, through the thin walls, long hours of silence occasionally interrupted by muffled sobs. He decided he needed to speak with Edward personally, but he didn't have his neighbor's phone number. He went to the building management, and with some persistence, managed to get the registered phone number. That night, after thinking carefully about what he would say, he called. Edward answered on the third ring, his voice tired. "Hello?" "Good evening, Edward. This is Martin, your neighbour from apartment 205. Sorry to call so late." Edward sat up straighter in his hotel chair, immediately alert. "Did something happen? Are the kids okay?" Martin chose his words carefully. "Look, I don't want to meddle, but I'm worried. I've been noticing some strange things. The kids leave very early by themselves. Sometimes I hear crying at night, and your wife, well, she seems to be absent most of the time. I know it's none of my business, but after what happened with my sister when we were kids, I can't just stand by and do nothing." Edward felt the blood run cold in his veins. "What kind of things have you heard?" Martin told him everything. The nighttime crying, the incident where Leo was left in the hallway waiting for someone to open the door, Veronica's frequent absences, the frightened way the children entered the apartment. Edward listened to every word, feeling his world crumble around him. How had he not noticed? How had he let things get to this point? "Thank you for telling me, Martin. I'll take care of this. I'm coming home tonight." Edward hung up, cancelled all his meetings for the next day, rebooked his flight, and began to pack his suitcase with trembling hands. The guilt he carried was suffocating. He had failed his children. He had trusted Veronica without question, without truly observing, without listening to the signs that were probably there all along. He had done exactly what he had sworn he would never do after his ex-wife abandoned them. He had put his own needs, his desire for a complete family, above the well-being of his children. In Chicago, Amelia and Leo were lying in the darkness of their room when they heard Veronica arrive, later than usual. She entered the apartment with heavy steps, slammed the door, and began talking on the phone, her loud, irritated voice echoing through the hallways. "I can't take this anymore, Mum. I didn't sign up to be a nanny. Edward is always traveling. The kids are clingy and annoying. And I'm missing out on work opportunities because of all this. I don't know how much longer I can take it." Amelia covered Leo's ears, but it was too late. The boy looked at her with eyes shimmering with tears. "She hates us, Amy. Did we do something really wrong?" Amelia hugged her brother tightly. "We didn't do anything wrong, Leo. Nothing. The problem isn't us. Some people just don't know how to love. But we have each other, and Dad loves us very much. Do you believe that?" Leo nodded, but the tears continued to fall. Later that night, when Leo finally fell asleep, exhausted from crying, Amelia took out the piece of paper Mrs. Eleanor had given her. She stared at the number for long minutes, her heart hammering in her chest. What if asking for help made everything worse? What if they separated her and Leo? What if her dad got angry at her for causing trouble? But as she looked at her brother sleeping restlessly, at the small face marked by a suffering he shouldn't know, Amelia knew she had no choice. She had to be brave. She had to be the voice Leo didn't have. With trembling hands, she picked up the apartment's landline phone, locked herself in the bathroom, and dialed Mrs. Eleanor's number. The teacher answered on the second ring, her voice immediately concerned. "Hello? Mrs. Eleanor, it's Amelia." Her voice came out in a shaky whisper. "Amelia, what happened? Are you okay?" I don't think I can take it anymore. Leo heard Veronica on the phone saying she hates us, that she wants to leave. He cried so much, and I don't know what to do anymore." Mrs. Eleanor sat up in bed, fully alert now. "Where is Veronica now?" "She's in her room. I think she's asleep." The teacher thought quickly. "Amelia, you did the right thing by calling me. Does your father know what's happening? I left a message for him today, but he hasn't called back yet. Can you talk to him?" Amelia explained about the confiscated cell phone, about how Veronica controlled all the calls. Mrs. Eleanor felt anger rise in her chest. "Listen, dear, tomorrow morning before you go to school, I want you and Leo to come straight to my house. I'll give you the address. Don't go back to the apartment after school. Come straight here, okay? We'll figure this out together." Amelia jotted down the address on a piece of paper she tore from an old notebook, thanked her with a choked voice, and hung up. For the first time in months, she felt something like hope. Someone had seen their suffering. Someone cared enough to help. The next morning, Amelia woke with a determination she hadn't felt in a long time. She got Leo ready with care, packed a small backpack with a few clothes and important items, and hid the letter she had written to her father in her jacket pocket. They left the apartment before Veronica woke up, and for the first time in weeks, Amelia didn't feel that tightness in her chest as she closed the door. The school day passed in a haze of anxiety mixed with anticipated relief. In the afternoon, when the bell rang, Amelia picked up Leo from his classroom, and instead of heading home, they walked in the opposite direction, following the address Mrs. Eleanor had given them. The teacher lived in a small, cozy house in the Lakeview neighborhood, with a well-tended garden and lace curtains in the windows. When they rang the bell, she opened the door immediately as if she had been waiting for them. "Come in, dears. You're safe here." Mrs. Eleanor guided them to the living room, where she had prepared hot milk and cookies. Amelia and Leo sat on the sofa, and for the first time in months, they allowed themselves to relax a little. The house smelled of cinnamon and safety, a stark contrast to the cold, hostile apartment they called home. The teacher sat across from them and picked up the phone. "Now we're going to call your father and tell him everything, okay?" She got the number from the school and dialed. Edward answered almost immediately, his voice tense. "Hello? Mr. Thompson, this is Eleanor Davis, Amelia's teacher. I need to speak with you urgently about your children." Edward stopped in the middle of the airport lobby. "Are they okay? What happened?" "They are with me now, at my house. They are physically fine but emotionally shaken. Mr. Thompson, your children are being severely neglected. Amelia told me everything, and I couldn't let them go back to that situation." Edward felt his legs buckle. "Where do you live?" "I'm coming there now. I'm at the airport. I just landed from Minneapolis." Mrs. Eleanor gave him the address, and while she waited, she sat between the children and hugged them. "Your father is coming. Everything is going to be okay. You were very brave." Amelia finally allowed herself to cry, all the fear and anguish of the past months pouring out in deep sobs. Leo followed suit, and Mrs. Eleanor held them both as they released months of pent-up pain. Edward crossed Chicago like a man possessed, the taxi seeming to move too slowly while his heart hammered in his chest. When he finally arrived at Mrs. Eleanor's house and saw his children on the sofa, pale, thin, with deep dark circles and that look of suffering in their eyes, he felt something break inside him. He knelt in front of them and hugged them with a strength that came from desperation. "Forgive me. Forgive me for not noticing. Forgive me for letting this happen." The children threw themselves into his arms, crying, holding on as if they feared he would disappear again. "Dad, we tried to tell you." Amelia's voice came out muffled against his shoulder. "But she wouldn't let us. She hid my phone. She wouldn't let us call. She said you were too busy." Edward held them tighter, tears streaming freely down his face. "I know, my love, I know, and it's my fault. I should have paid more attention. I should have noticed. But it's over. It's over now. No one is ever going to hurt you again." Mrs. Eleanor let them have their moment before pulling up a chair and sitting beside Edward. "We need to talk about what happened. The children need support, probably therapy, and the situation with Veronica needs to be resolved officially. I've already contacted social services, and they will want to speak with you." Edward nodded, still, holding his children. "I'll do whatever it takes, anything." Amelia pulled the crumpled letter from her pocket and handed it to her father. "I wrote this for you. It's everything that happened, everything I couldn't say." Edward unfolded the paper with trembling hands and began to read. Each word was a stab to the heart, the description of the days alone, the fear, the emotional hunger, the loneliness, the helplessness. The way Amelia had tried to protect her brother, how she had taken on responsibilities she shouldn't have, how she had felt invisible in her own home. When he finished, Edward could no longer see the words through his tears. "You will never go through this again. Never again. I'm quitting this job that keeps me away. I'll find something here in Chicago. I will be present. I will be the father you deserve." The children snuggled closer to him, believing because they needed to believe, hoping because they had no other choice. Mrs. Eleanor offered tea and more cookies, and gradually the tension began to ease. Leo even managed a small smile when Edward promised to take them for ice cream despite the cold. Later, when the children were calmer, Edward had to face the inevitable. He left them in Mrs. Eleanor's care and returned to the apartment. Veronica was there, reclining on the sofa watching television, apparently unconcerned that the children hadn't come home from school. She looked up when he entered, surprised. "Edward? I thought you weren't back until next week." "Where are my children, Veronica?" His voice was low, controlled, but filled with a rage she had never seen before. She shrugged. "I don't know. They haven't come home from school yet, I guess." Edward took 2 steps toward her. "You didn't even bother to find out where they are? You didn't care that they weren't back on time?" Veronica stood up, defensive. "Edward, I'm not their mother. You asked me to stay here while you traveled, not to be a 24-hour nanny. I asked you to care for them, to give them attention, affection, to be present. You knew what it meant to live here." His voice rose, all his frustration and guilt turning into anger. Veronica crossed her arms. "You didn't tell me you'd be traveling so much, that they would be so dependent, so needy. I have my career, my life. I can't drop everything for children who aren't even mine. So you decided to just ignore them, to let a 10-year-old girl take care of her sick brother alone, to hide her phone so she couldn't ask for help." Veronica blinked, surprised that he knew everything. Edward continued, his voice trembling with emotion. "They cried at night, Veronica. They were emotionally starving. They felt invisible, unwanted in their own home. And you didn't even care." Veronica tried to argue back, but the words sounded empty even to her. "I never hurt them. I never laid a hand on them." Edward cut her off. "You don't have to hit someone to cause damage, Veronica. Neglect hurts just as much as violence, and you neglected my children in every way possible." The conversation that followed was painful and necessary. In the end, Veronica agreed to leave the apartment. There was nothing left for her there, and deep down she had known it from the beginning. While Veronica packed her things, Edward sat in the children's room, looking at the drawings on the walls, the overly organized toys, the signs of lives that had tried to make themselves small so as not to be a bother. He silently promised that he would turn this space back into a real home, where laughter and messes were welcome, where the children could go back to just being children. That night, Amelia and Leo slept at Mrs. Eleanor's house, in a guest room with fresh-smelling sheets and warm blankets. Edward stayed with them until they fell asleep, holding their hands and softly singing the songs he used to sing when they were babies. For the first time in months, the children slept peacefully, without nightmares, without fear of what tomorrow would bring. In the apartment next door, Martin heard the sounds of moving, suitcases being dragged, the door slamming for the last time. He felt a profound relief. He had done the right thing by calling Edward. This time, he had been able to help. This time, the story would have a different ending from the one that still haunted him from his childhood. The days that followed were of slow but steady reconstruction. Edward resigned from the job that required so much travel and accepted a local position with a smaller salary, but with hours that would allow him to be present. He took the children to start therapy with a psychologist specializing in childhood trauma. Mrs. Eleanor visited them regularly, becoming a constant and comforting presence. Martin also grew closer, becoming a sort of surrogate uncle who took the children to the park on Sundays. Amelia gradually began to be a child again. The dark circles faded, her smile returned, her participation in class re-emerged. Leo improved as well, starting to ask questions again, to laugh, to trust that the world could be a safe place. There were still difficult days, occasional nightmares, fears that surfaced out of nowhere, but now they had a present father to hold them through the storms, a support network that caught them, and the certainty that they were seen, loved, and important. 3 months had passed since that day at Mrs. Eleanor's house, and the apartment in Lincoln Park was no longer the same place. Edward had painted the walls with brighter colors, replaced the heavy curtains with ones that let the sunlight stream in freely, and rearranged the furniture to create spaces where the children could play without fear of making a mess. Leo's drawings returned to the refrigerator. Amelia's toys were scattered across the living room, and the sound of laughter filled the rooms that had once known only silence. Amelia woke up that September morning with a different feeling in her chest. It was Saturday, and for the first time in a long time, waking up didn't bring that knot of anxiety that had accompanied her for months. She stretched in bed, listening to the familiar and comforting sounds of breakfast being made, her father's voice humming softly in the kitchen, Leo already awake and asking for pancakes. She got up slowly and walked to the living room, where she found a scene that made her smile. Edward was in the kitchen wearing the ridiculous pineapple print apron Leo had picked out at the store, trying to flip pancakes, while the boy, sitting on the counter, gave exaggerated instructions as if he were a famous chef. "You have to wait for the bubbles to pop on the other side, Dad. Grandma always said that." Edward laughed, ruffling his son's hair. "Your brother is a very harsh food critic, Amy. Come defend me here." Amelia joined them, and the three of them made breakfast together, with that happy mess of people who are in no hurry who know the whole day is there available with no trips to rush goodbyes. They sat at the table, and while they ate, Edward announced the plans for the day. "I thought we could go to Lincoln Park, have a picnic. Mrs. Eleanor and Martin are coming with us. What do you think?" The children's faces lit up. Leo immediately started listing everything he wanted to bring, and Amelia offered to help make the sandwiches. There was a lightness to the moment, a precious normality that Edward would never again take for granted. He watched his children talking excitedly about the outing and felt a deep gratitude for having had the chance to fix his mistakes, to rebuild what he had almost destroyed through neglect and misplaced trust. Mrs. Eleanor arrived at noon, bringing a still warm carrot cake and that motherly smile that had become so important to all of them. In the past few months, the teacher had become much more than an educator. She was a confidant, an advisor, a constant presence who had helped fill some of the voids the children carried. Martin showed up soon after, with a new ball for Leo and a book he knew Amelia had been wanting to read. The group headed to the park in 2 cars, and the afternoon unfolded with the imperfect perfection of real life. Leo chased pigeons, flew a kite with Martin, and ate cake until his face was covered in chocolate. Amelia sat on the grass next to Mrs. Eleanor, and the two talked about books, school, and plans for the future. Edward watched it all from a slight distance, recording every moment in his memory like someone collecting treasures. At the end of the afternoon, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange, the group sat in a circle on the grass. Leo rested his head in his father's lap, sleepy after so much play, and Amelia leaned against Mrs. Eleanor. Martin, always quieter, observed the scene with a peaceful smile. He was the one who broke the silence. "You know, sometimes life gives us second chances to do the right thing. We don't always get it right the first time, but when the opportunity comes around again, we have to grab it with everything we've got." Edward looked at his neighbor and understood that he wasn't just talking about their situation, but about the wounds he carried from his own past. "You saved my children, Martin. I will never forget that. I can never thank you enough." Martin shook his head. "You would have figured it out eventually. I just sped up the process. And Mrs. Eleanor here, she's the one who really made the difference. She's the one who gave the children the courage to ask for help." Mrs. Eleanor stroked Amelia's hair. "These children already had the courage inside them. I just gave them a safe space to use it. The real hero here is Amelia. At 10 years old, she took on responsibilities she shouldn't have, protected her brother, and stayed strong when everything was falling apart. She's incredible." Amelia felt her face flush at the compliment, but she also felt something heal inside her. For so long, she had felt small, powerless, invisible. Now finally, she was truly seen. As night began to fall and the group prepared to leave, Leo woke from his nap and asked a question that surprised everyone. "Dad, was Veronica evil?" The innocence in the boy's voice contrasted with the complexity of the question. Edward knelt in front of him, thinking carefully about his answer. "No, son, she wasn't evil. She just didn't know how to love right. She wasn't ready to be part of a family. Sometimes people make bad choices, not because they're bad people, but because they're lost or scared." "And do you still love her?" Edward shook his head. "No, Leo, I thought I did, but I realized that what I loved was the idea of having a complete family again. I wanted to give you a mother so badly that I didn't stop to see if she actually wanted to be your mother. That was my mistake." Amelia heard that and felt a knot she didn't even know she was carrying come undone in her chest. It hadn't been their fault. It never was. The conversation that followed was honest and healing. Edward spoke about his own fears and failings, about how their mother's abandonment had left him desperate to fill that void, about how he had confused his need for a partner with the need to give his children a traditional family. He talked about how he had learned, in the most painful way possible, that family is not defined by traditional structures but by love, presence, and commitment. "We are a family," Amelia said, her voice firm. "You, me, and Leo, and Mrs. Eleanor and Martin. They're family now too, aren't they?" Edward smiled, his eyes shining. "Yes, they are, my love. Family is who chooses to stay, who chooses to love, who shows up in the tough times, and you are all my family." Leo hugged his father tightly. "I like this family. We don't need anyone else." Back at the apartment, after Mrs. Eleanor and Martin had said their goodbyes with promises of new outings, Edward put the children to bed. He read to Leo until the boy fell asleep, then went to Amelia's room where she was awake, staring at the ceiling. "Can I come in?" She nodded, and Edward sat on the edge of the bed. "Are you okay, sweetie?" Amelia took a moment to answer, organizing thoughts that were still difficult to express. "I was thinking about that time, about how bad it was, but I was also thinking that maybe it needed to happen for us to learn some things." Edward frowned. "What things?" Amelia sat up, hugging her knees. "That you need to be present, that we need to really talk, not just about school. That you can't trust just anyone because you want to believe everything will work out." Edward felt his chest tighten at the painful maturity in his daughter's voice. "You're right, and I've learned. I left that job not just because I needed to be home more, but because I realized no career is worth it if I lose you in the process." Amelia rested her head on her father's shoulder. "I'm scared you'll meet someone else and it will all happen again." The confession came out in a vulnerable whisper. Edward hugged his daughter tightly. "Amy, I promise that if someday in the distant future I meet someone, you two will always come first, and that person will have to truly love you, not just tolerate you. They will have to earn your trust, prove they deserve to be part of this family. Because you are my priority today and always, understand?" Amelia nodded, feeling the security in his words, the certainty that her father was serious. "Dad?" "Yes, sweetie. Thank you for coming back. Thank you for believing me." Edward kissed her forehead. "Thank you for being brave enough to ask for help. You saved yourself and your brother, Amelia. Never forget that." The two of them stayed there, hugging for long minutes, healing wounds that would take time to close completely, but which were already beginning to scar over. The weeks that followed brought more positive changes. Edward enrolled the children in extracurricular activities they chose themselves. Amelia returned to the guitar lessons she had to abandon, and Leo started swimming. Mrs. Eleanor organized weekly gatherings where she read books to a small group of neighborhood children, and Amelia and Leo never missed a session. Martin became a constant presence on weekends, taking them to explore new places in Chicago, museums, parks, the Navy Pier. The therapist who was seeing the children reported constant progress. The nightmares decreased, the anxiety lessened, their confidence grew. Amelia started getting excellent grades again, and even participated in a school play, playing a courageous character who spoke about not being afraid to use her own voice. Edward was in the front row, giving a standing ovation, with Leo on his lap and tears in his eyes. Leo also blossomed. The quiet, scared boy transformed back into the talkative, curious child he had always been. He asked 1,000 questions, told wild stories, and laughed loudly and without fear. One afternoon, while Edward was making dinner, Leo walked into the kitchen and asked out of the blue, "Dad, do you think everyone deserves a second chance?" Edward turned off the stove and knelt to his son's level. "It depends. Why do you ask?" "Because at school the teacher said everyone makes mistakes and everyone deserves another chance." "But what about Veronica? Does she deserve a second chance?" Edward took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "You know, son, I think everyone deserves the chance to learn from their mistakes and become a better person. But that doesn't mean those people have to come back into our lives. Veronica has the right to grow and change, but far away from us. We forgive so we don't carry around anger, but we don't forget, so we don't repeat the mistakes. Make sense? Leo thought for a moment and nodded. Like when I forgave Peter for breaking my toy car, but I don't lend him my toys anymore. Edward laughed. Exactly like that. You're very smart, you know that? The boy smiled proudly and went back to the living room, where Amelia was working on a puzzle, and Edward stood there marveling at his children's capacity to process difficult experiences and turn them into learning. One day, a few months later, Mrs. Eleanor invited the family to a special event at the school. There would be an exhibition of essays on resilience, and Amelia's text had been selected. The girl was nervous, but also proud. On the day of the exhibition, Edward, Leo, and Martin went to support her. Amelia's essay was framed on one of the main walls, and it read, "Resilience isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about learning to live in spite of it. For a long time I thought I had to be strong on my own, that asking for help was a weakness. But I discovered that true courage is in saying, 'I'm not okay,' and accepting the hand that reaches out. I went through very hard times, moments when I thought I would never smile again, but I learned that there are always good people in the world, people who see our pain and choose to help. I learned that family isn't just about who shares your blood, but who chooses to stay during the hard times. And I learned that even after the worst storms, the sun always comes out again." Edward read those words with tears streaming freely down his face. Beside him, Martin discreetly wiped his own eyes, and even Leo, who didn't understand all the words, knew that this was important. Mrs. Eleanor approached them, placing a hand on Edward's shoulder. "She's okay. You're all okay, and you're going to stay that way." The exhibition ended with student presentations, and Amelia went on stage to read her essay aloud. Her voice trembled at first, but grew stronger with each sentence. When she finished, the audience erupted in applause, but the only applause that mattered to her was from her father, her brother, Mrs. Eleanor, and Martin, her chosen family, her safety net. After the event, the group went to celebrate at an ice cream parlor the children loved. Sitting around a messy table with colorful sundaes, they talked about future plans. Edward shared that he had received a promotion at his new job, a position that valued his work but respected his time with his family. Mrs. Eleanor told them she was writing a book about her experiences as a teacher, including stories of student resilience. Martin revealed that he had started painting again, a hobby he had abandoned after his wife's death, and that the children inspired him. Amelia and Leo listened with genuine interest, asking questions, giving opinions, participating actively. They were no longer children who lived in the shadows, invisible, afraid to take up space. They were an essential part of a family that had rebuilt itself on more solid foundations, made of communication, presence, and true love. That night, back at the apartment, Edward went into the children's room for the bedtime ritual they had established. Each night, they would each share 3 good things from the day, a practice the therapist had suggested to focus on the positive. Leo started. "Ice cream, swimming, and playing with Martin in the park," Amelia continued. "The exhibition, seeing people like my essay and being here now with you guys," Edward finished. "Seeing my daughter shine on stage, my son's smile, and the certainty that we are on the right path. Dad, do you think we'll always be this happy?" Leo's question was laden with both hope and insecurity. Edward thought about the answer. "We'll still have hard days, son, everyone does. But the difference is that now we'll face them together. I won't leave you alone again, and when things get tough, we'll talk. We'll ask for help. We won't keep secrets. Deal?" "Deal," the 2 children replied in unison. Edward hugged them both, breathing in the scent of their freshly washed hair, feeling the warm weight of their trusting bodies against his. He loved them with an intensity that sometimes scared him, but which he now also channeled into concrete actions. Love wasn't just a feeling. It was a daily choice, constant presence, genuine attention. In the months that followed, life settled into a new normal. A normal that included family dinners every night, conversations about their day over breakfast, outings on the weekends, homework done with supervision and help, generous hugs, and constant words of affirmation. Edward learned to truly balance work and family, not just in theory. He learned to say no to commitments that would interfere with his children's important moments. He learned to be present, not just physically, but emotionally. Amelia returned to being a child in a way she hadn't been for a long time, laughing loudly, making messes, asking for silly things, having the occasional tantrum that was healthy for her age. The responsibility she had carried for so long was gradually returned to where it belonged, with the adults. Leo also grew more secure, more confident, knowing he had real protection, not just empty promises. A year after that day at Mrs. Eleanor's house, the family organized a small party to mark the date. It wasn't a celebration of the suffering, but of the rebirth that came after it. They invited Mrs. Eleanor, Martin, some of the children's school friends and their families, and neighbors from the building who had become friends. The apartment was full of life, laughter, music, and food. In a quiet moment, Edward found himself on the balcony with Martin. The neighbor looked out at the illuminated city and said in a low voice, "You know, when I was a kid, I couldn't save my sister. She stayed with an aunt who said she'd take care of her, but who neglected her terribly. By the time we found out, she was already very sick, very emotionally damaged. It took her years to recover, and our relationship was never the same. I always carried that guilt." Edward listened in respectful silence. "But helping your kids, seeing them recover happy again, it healed something in me too. It showed me that we're not always too late, that sometimes we can make a difference. So thank you, Edward, for letting me be a part of this, for giving me this second chance to do the right thing." Edward hugged his friend. "We all got second chances here, Martin, and we all made the best of them." Inside the house, they heard Amelia and Leo singing something off-key but joyful, and the two men smiled. That sound, that joy, was living proof that every effort, every difficult change, every honest conversation had been worth it. Mrs. Eleanor joined them on the balcony. "Beautiful, isn't it, to see how things can change when the right people show up at the right time?" Edward agreed. "Or when we finally open our eyes to see what was in front of us all along." The teacher laughed. "That too. But the important thing is that you all did the hard work. Healing doesn't happen by magic. It happens with daily effort, with conscious choices, with the courage to change." The party continued late into the night, and when everyone had finally gone home and the children were asleep, exhausted but happy, Edward sat alone in the living room for a few minutes. He looked around the transformed apartment, at the new photos on the walls showing genuine smiles, at the drawings on the fridge, at the toys scattered on the floor. This was a real home now. Not perfect, but real, full of the imperfect and wonderful love of people who chose to stay, who chose to love, who chose to grow together. He thought of Veronica briefly, without anger, just with a distant sadness. He hoped she had found her way, that she had learned from her mistakes, that she was happier far away from them. But this story was no longer about her. It was about reconstruction, about second chances, about the transformative power of true love and genuine presence. In the bedroom, Amelia was still awake when her father came in to say goodnight for the second time. "Dad." "Yes, sweetie." "I was thinking that I'm very lucky." Edward sat on the edge of the bed. "Why?" "Because even when everything got bad, in the end it worked out. I have you, I have Leo, I have Mrs. Eleanor and Martin. I have people who truly love me. Not everyone has that." Edward stroked his daughter's hair. "You are lucky, but you're also brave. You fought for this, Amy. You didn't let the situation break you completely. You saved enough strength to ask for help when you needed it. That's courage." Amelia smiled sleepily. "I learned from the best." Her father smiled, kissed her forehead, and left the room, leaving the door ajar just as the children liked it. Lying in his own bed later, Edward reflected on the long road. They had traveled, from the depths of despair and emotional abandonment to this moment of peace and security. It hadn't been easy. There had been sleepless nights, days of paralyzing guilt, moments when he doubted if they would ever fully recover. But here they were, not just surviving, but thriving. The apartment that had once known only loneliness and fear now echoed with laughter and life. The children who had felt invisible now shone with the confidence of knowing they were seen, loved and valued. And he who had almost lost what was most precious by being blind and distant now lived each day with gratitude and full presence. Outside, the city of Chicago slept under a starry sky. Inside the apartment in Lincoln Park, a rebuilt family rested in peace, knowing that tomorrow would bring more opportunities to grow, to love, and to be together. And in this simple but profound certainty, lay all the happiness that truly mattered. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Edward, Amelia, and Leo has deeply touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of resilience, courage, and the love that rebuilds and heals, please leave a like right now so this story can reach more people who need to hear this message of hope. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our moving stories, and tell us in the comments which moment marked you the most, which character you identified with, or share your own story of overcoming adversity. Every day we bring intense and true narratives like this one, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul, and remind us that, even after the biggest storms, it is always possible to start over. Your story matters too, and we want to hear from you. We look forward to seeing you with much affection in the next episode, with another story that will stir your emotions and touch your soul. Until then, and thank you for being part of this community that believes in the transformative power of stories.